On today's episode, we break down the controversy surrounding Kyle Dubas right now. Is he also going to be joining the Pittsburgh Penguins? We'll discuss that, Fraser Minten, and the World Championships on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the May 26th edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano from TSN, and my guy, Dave Morassutti from Sportsnet. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL, and when you enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. What's going on, Dave? How you feeling on a Friday?
Feeling pretty good. Can't wait for the weekend. Can't wait for a very lackluster sports weekend. There's really not much happening now with
well, at least Vegas, Dallas gave us an extra game there. We'll see some Vegas and Dallas game 5 on Saturday. But yeah, there's not a whole lot like with Florida and advancing in 4. You've got the Nuggets advanced in 4. So I guess the Heat and the Celtics gave us another game in the NBA, and then you've got obviously a game 5 in the Western Final here in the NHL. I suppose we'll see some lackluster Blue Jays action. They've been very poor, although they had themselves apparently quite the players-only meeting the other day. Go check out Locked On Blue Jays to hear what's going on with them. As for the Maple Leafs, not a whole lot of updates on the GM front. Like, we're still sitting here waiting on a couple more names to pop up as, candidates that they are planning on interviewing. A lot has been speculated about some names that we've tossed out there, whether that would be, Bergevin or potentially, obviously, Brad Treliving has been announced that he will be speaking with Brendan Shanahan. So that one's been for sure has been announced, but whether or not Botterill will get an opportunity to interview for the job, Brandon Pridham, like we really have not heard of a whole lot of names, just that the process is underway and going to start, and we'll see who becomes the successor to Kyle Dubas and try to lead this team to victory. Speaking of Kyle Dubas, though, Dave, he kind of has himself in a little bit of hot water right now. The NHLPA investigating a situation, potentially controversial situation with Kyle Dubas and his agency, and how it potentially could be against the rules. Did you want to dive into that a little bit and explain the situation?
Yeah, so as we found out during Brendan Shanahan's nice and long processed press conference, he did detail that Kyle Dubas does have an agent that helped him with the negotiations for his contract. Well, that agent, Chris Armstrong, also works for a high-profile agency called Wasserman Group. They represent a lot of NHL players, one specifically Austin Matthews, and it's pretty much there's a rule basically dictating. Now there's a little bit of work. I'll explain that in a second, but the rule is that you can't represent both sides if you're an agent, right? You can't go and represent players, but also represent executives. You have to have there has to be a divide, right? Because there's potential conflicts there, with that. But the thing here is Chris Armstrong technically doesn't represent. He's not an NHLPA certified agent.
No,
because he represents golfers. I think like Tony Finau is one of his clients, a very prominent golfer. But the thing here is Dubas is doing business, or he is represented by an agency that also represents NHL players. So you wonder if there's, that potential conflict of interest there where, is he getting the inside track based on relationships that, his agent has with those that he works with, right? it's a very when you think about all those factors, it's a sticky situation because it doesn't sound very good when you can't say for sure if he's had that inside track, but you can't say he hasn't either, right? It's just one of those really weird things. I think the NHLPA is clearly investigating it. You can bet they're gonna. I as soon as you heard it, I was like, yeah, they're investigating this. Like, there's no way they're not gonna just like say it's nothing. It's very weird that I understand maybe Kyle Dubas had a relationship with Chris Armstrong. I believe they both went to the same university, so maybe there was a relationship there.
They were longtime friends, so like they've been buddies for a long time.
So like I can understand that, but like your buddy should be like, I can't represent you because I work for a side that.
Well, so the reason why it's not as like black and white and cut and dry as it may seem is because, as you outlined, I mean, Chris Armstrong is not a hockey agent. He does not work in the hockey department of the Wasserman Group. They have many different arms involved in their agency. So, he doesn't necessarily, have much contact, I suppose, with all the other agents that are within this within the Wasserman Group, and that's kind of where it gets dicey because it does say in the CBA or in the I was in the CBA, but this is an NHLPA rule, Section B, Item 9.3 of the NHL's regulations governing agency certification. Details on prohibited conduct that is subject to discipline, states that agents are prohibited from representing, providing services to either directly or indirectly, or engaging in or proposing to engage in business ventures with any officer, employee, or independent contractor of an NHL club, other than professional or other professional hockey clubs or major junior clubs, and any entity affiliated with any foregoing, including but not limited to coaches, GMs, scouts, and locker room personnel. So that is according to NHLPA certified agents. And as you mentioned, Chris Armstrong, Dubas' representative, is not an NHLPA certified agent. He is a agent that, yes, is with this agency, but typically represents other sports, other athletes. He's a high profile golf agent, some football players, basketball guys, but not NHL. So that's where it does get a little bit confusing, I suppose, where it's like, yeah, okay, it's the same agency, but like there's not overlap. And again, it's being investigated right now by the NHLPA to see if there is a conflict of interest there. I'm not exactly sure what anyone could do about it at this point. I guess maybe Kyle will just have to get a new agent, which sure, I mean, it sounds like he's very close to signing in Pittsburgh and probably won't need an agent anyways to make that happen and get that done. So I don't know if it really matters at the end of the day. But it was kind of a weird little story that popped up here yesterday about some sort of conflict of interest. But I'm not sure what really will come of it. Like, it's not as though I believe Kyle Dubas would be suspended and can't practice as a general manager for a year. I don't think that'll be the case. If anything, he may just have to get new representation. That might be, at the end of the day, what they decide. And if that's the case, okay. It's not like it impacts the Maple Leafs or it's going to help the Maple Leafs in any way, right?
No, like this, like I mean, if we're being honest here, I don't see how the Leafs would get any blowback from this just because.
No.
But I mean, first off, I don't know. I don't even know if the Leafs were even aware that Kyle Dubas had an agent up until it came time to negotiate the contract, right? Yeah. So,
which also, as the days have passed by, and we've kind of sat there and picking apart everything that everyone is saying, maybe it wasn't just a random slip of the tongue or a random thought that was thrown out there in passing by Brendan Shanahan about him bringing up the fact that Kyle said that he had an agent and to reach out to his agent and making, some people dig into it. Oh, Kyle has an agent. Who could this be? Shanny knew. I wonder if that was a purposeful dropping of crumbs there to lead to all this. What do you think? Is that too tinfoil hat theory?
I think it was just maybe not to. I mean, I don't think Brendan Shanahan was looking to lead an investigation, but maybe just to make people realize that Kyle Dubas wasn't going to make this an easy negotiation by having an agent to get involved, right? Like sometimes when you get an agent involved, they can make the demands, and Shanahan could say things to the agent that maybe he won't say to Kyle. That could be why Kyle Dubas did that in the first place. I'm sure Shanahan probably doesn't like the idea that he wasn't directly dealing with Kyle Dubas and probably wanted to make that known as well. I didn't think about that of whether he wanted to open up that can of worms, but it is certainly interesting.
On the other side, Dave, we'll continue to have a discussion about Kyle Dubas and his future because he is very close, according to reports, to joining an NHL franchise. Go figure. Like less than 2 weeks ago, he said it's Toronto or it's nowhere. And all of a sudden, it sounds as though Dubas could have a new job before the Leafs even have a GM in place. We'll tell you where that is on the other side. But first, Dave, how about a word from today's show sponsor?
Yep, today's show is brought to you by Birddogs, a company that was initially launched in 2014 with focus on creating a more comfortable gym short. Well, now they've expanded the line to many different things. You can wear them as golf shorts. You can wear them as just casual shorts if you're going out for dinner, but they also have other great styles like some khaki pants, exercise pants, joggers, whatever you have. Birddogs has it because they are a versatile company that like to provide comfort as well. So make sure you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL where you can enter the promo code LockedOnNHL and they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. So that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL, promo code LockedOnNHL, and you can get that deal right now at birddogs.com.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. We're a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, so be sure that you are subscribed if you haven't already. And if you are and you're an everydayer who comes and listens to the show, we appreciate you guys oh so very much. So Kyle Dubas, last Monday, it was literally last Monday, came out and said, it's Toronto or it's nowhere. And we now sit here on Friday, and according to Chris Johnston, there is a 98% chance that Kyle Dubas was fibbing and lying to us, and he is 98% sure that he is going to be the next general manager of the Pittsburgh Penguins. How does that make you feel, Dave?
I mean, I know a lot of people are just like, oh, I thought he said he wasn't going to be going anywhere, but situations change, right? Like he probably got the green light from his family to stay in Toronto. And so like once the Leafs basically told him you're not coming back, we're parting ways with you. Like to me, that signals like what he said in terms of Toronto or nowhere kind of changes a little bit with that outcome. Maybe it also just kind of was Kyle Dubas. I still believe that was a negotiating tactic in some ways. I understand a lot of people says that was an honest, forthright thing. I said I had no issue with him being honest about that, but in a way, I still think that was somewhat of a negotiating tactic to try to, dig in a little bit and make the Leafs really, I wouldn't say pony up more money or anything like that, but I thought it was just, it's always a narrative thing when you say something like that in the media. And so I'm a little surprised that because he said it was tough for his family, now moving to Pittsburgh, like if he gets the job in Pittsburgh, you're uprooting your family to go join, unless his family is going to stay in Toronto or in Ontario, which I doubt.
Family. Yeah,
a young family. So now you got to deal with moving to a new country, right? Like it's not just as simple as, hey guys, we're going to Pittsburgh. It's like, well, his wife, if she was working, has to now deal with that issue of trying to get a job in the States, his kids. Like, it's not an easy thing to just move from Canada to the States. I'm sure like NHL clubs have figured out ways to make
Yeah, they
it work.
streamline everything. It's a lot more. It's easier for athletes and people
Yeah.
who work to get the work visas and
Yeah.
all that. Everything's very much streamlined, as if it's a lot different than if you or I were trying to do that, or the average folk. But still, there is a process, and one that could be deemed as annoying for some people.
Yeah. Yeah. So I found it. I find that the whole situation interesting because it isn't going to be an easy, move for him. But I mean, I feel like once the Leafs said he wasn't coming back, and the way that it kind of all unfolded, I felt like it was just gonna. I thought just it changes the narrative again after what we heard from him go with his press conference.
And it just so yesterday morning I was listening to First Up on TSN 1050, and they had Rob Rossi on the show. I don't know, did you read that Rob Rossi article that was in the Athletic about the Pittsburgh Penguins, by the way?
I did not read that. I saw it. I saw people throw it out there. I just hadn't had a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, I haven't finished it, but I read the first little bit of it. Really recommend it if anyone wants to know how chaotic it was in the Pittsburgh Penguins front office this year. There's a reason why they've decided to move on from Burke and Hextall. I'll say that did not paint Hextall in a very positive light. So hopefully he's not part of the Maple Leafs plans to bring in as a potential general manager here. But he was also on First Up yesterday, and it's to his belief that Fenway Sports Group is willing to give Kyle Dubas the type of autonomy that he apparently wanted in Toronto when it comes to the hockey ops side. He wants to have that streamlined communication with ownership, where it didn't have to go through a mediator, aka Brendan Shanahan. And it appears like that was a big sticking point in Toronto, and maybe where things did break down ultimately. That's kind of what's being reported now. But it seems as though that won't be a problem in Pittsburgh. It's when it comes to hockey operations, it sounds as though they're willing to give him all the power on that side to build that club and build them back into a contender, and do whatever that they deem necessary. And he goes straight to ownership. There's no middleman in between like there was here in Toronto. I would imagine that was a very attractive offer if this is indeed a true report from Rob Rossi, and a big reason why Kyle Dubas is so interested in this Pittsburgh job, and why ultimately he's willing to leave everything here in Toronto to go and get that.
Yeah, and that's what makes jobs like that, attractive. You think of like other jobs, like when we were talking about like Doug Armstrong moving from St. Louis to Toronto, the dynamic changes already for him, because in St. Louis, it's his call. He only has to tell the owner, this is what we're doing. The owner says, yep, you're good. He doesn't have to go through hoops. He doesn't have to go through a board. He doesn't have to go through a president. It's Doug Armstrong's thing. So I can see why that would be an attractive thing for Kyle Dubas to say, okay, I'm going to a place where I don't have to deal with that sort of with that same what I had to go through in Toronto. And maybe that gives him the power he needs, or maybe in some ways it also takes away that filter maybe that some GMs need. We see sometimes when you give more autonomy to a GM, that means who's going to hold them accountable. Obviously, the owners will hold them accountable when things don't go well.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it's all about the GM, and you have to, like, I understand that's what they're paid to do. You got to have faith that they're going to do the right moves. But, sometimes there's a reason why that president of hockey operators is kind of a crucial role.
Can I ask you a question? Sure. When it comes to Brendan Shanahan? What has Brendan Shanahan done to essentially look at Kyle Dubas and say, you haven't earned final say, I have earned final say, because my track record is so great? what exactly has, like, this is an honest question that I've been asking around and can't really get an answer on, like, what makes Brendan Shanahan, other than the fact that he is president of hockey operations and it's quite literally his job, but what makes him think that his views and his decisions are better or more right than Kyle Dubas's decisions?
That's a great question. Just because, yeah, I mean, he doesn't have the record of a G. He's never done the GM role before.
Right. So, like,
the only thing you can say is he has spent time in the league front office. I understand that was the part of player safety, but you can tell that he's spent time talking and working in that network of understanding, how that situation all works and things like that.
yeah,
But
if you want to ask him, like, hey, do you think our guy's going to get suspended? Okay, I guess he
I,
has a lot of experience in that. But when it comes to roster building, what experience does he have in roster building?
I mean, the only thing you can say is, when he first came to Toronto, he took kind of time to just kind of oversee things and how things were being done. I'm sure he's leaned on people, during his time, before when he had Dave Nonis here. So he probably got a chance to see how that all worked out there.
Lou.
I'm sure he had, he had Lou Lamoriello as well. I'm sure he has a lot of people that he would lean on to give him the advice and just kind of where he's going. And you can't discount his time as a player, right? Like, look at Joe Sakic in Colorado. What gave him more right than the guys he brought in? He didn't have any experience as GM.
Well, did he not serve as like an AGM prior? I mean, he at least was in front office, I believe, with Colorado, kind of doing what Spezza was doing, where he was a special assistant too, and then kind of worked his way up the ladder before eventually becoming the GM. I don't believe he just stepped directly into the general manager's shoes. I think there were some steps he took prior to getting there.
I think, yeah. So I think I know he retired for a few years and then eventually he worked his way back to the front office and then got promoted. So, I think, I mean, Shanahan's probably, I don't know if Shanahan worked in a front office right after he retired. I didn't really look at his history before he went to the front office of the NHL. I think he probably did something. Like he was part of the NHL's vice president of hockey and business development. So he's done some work with that. He wasn't just in the player safety department. So I'm sure that he's had some background. I don't think the Leafs are just getting a guy who just doesn't have an idea. And look, he probably had,
but he has the background to be the president, right?
Yeah.
To be the president of a club,
right?
not to be a GM.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about hockey operations, you're talking about roster building and him having final say. Well, what makes his final say, more? It's not like he has the experience that even guy like Kyle Dubas, I guess, technically had. Like, imagine Lou Lamoriello. Like, he had final say when Lou Lamoriello was around. What gives him, the right to tell Lou, no, you're doing it wrong. I mean, you should do it this way. No, we don't think that's a good trade. I'm going to veto that. I'm not even going to bring that to the board. Like, what, like, could you imagine how that conversation would have went with Lou Lamoriello? Not very well.
What I would say is you have to respect the job title, right? Like, MLSE gave him president. Like, Lou Lamoriello, who's the one that signs his paycheck? Well, it's MLSE's board, right? And Lou's got to respect the chain of command. Kyle Dubas has to respect the chain of command. I understand that he doesn't have the experience, but that, sometimes when you're working in your line of field, your supervisor might not have the experience, but you have to respect that because that's just the way the chain of command works. So
yeah, no, I get that, but just from afar, I'm sitting here thinking like, I don't know, maybe Dubas did have the right, I guess, to say, maybe I can speak with the board with my own thoughts and views. I don't know. It was just something that just kind of was percolating through my brain a little bit. So I thought, why don't we just bring it to the pod and just have a quick conversation about it. But it is what it is. Ultimately, he is the president. He is the head of the snake when it comes to hockey operations, and whoever the new general manager is for the Toronto Maple Leafs is going to have to answer to Brendan Shanahan. It's just the way that it goes. GM, Shanny, the board, back to Shanny, and then the GM finally gets the answer of the original question of what moves they want to do. So that's just how it works here in Toronto. But apparently in Pittsburgh, it'll be a little more streamlined. Dubas, straight to the board. It's what he wanted here in Toronto. That's what's being reported at least, and he'll get that in Pittsburgh. So it sounds like he's very close to signing there. He had a little off-the-books meeting at the practice facility, ran into Sidney Crosby while he was there. I would imagine that was a nice little stop and chat that they had. And we'll see where that goes. And then we'll also see what happens with the Maple Leafs in their GM search. So far, Brad Treliving still the only concrete name that we know of that will be interviewing with the Toronto Maple Leafs this week. I would imagine there will be a few more names pop up throughout the next little bit here. On the other side, some craziness going on at the World Championships. 3 of 4 underdogs with the upset victories yesterday to set up a wild semifinals that goes down this weekend. Also, we've got one Maple Leaf in the Memorial Cup. He makes his debut tonight. We'll talk about that as well on the other side. But first, Dave, having a word from one of our show sponsors. It's our friends over at FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NHL playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Go ahead tomorrow. You got Vegas, Dallas, Game 5. Can Vegas close it out? If so, I like the money line option there for you. And there's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than North America's #1 sports book. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and our team is the Toronto Maple Leafs, but also our team is another squad that wears a Maple Leaf across their chest, and that's Team Canada at the World Hockey Championships. And they were actually the underdogs, Dave, yesterday going into their quarterfinal matchup against Finland, Finland beat Canada in the gold medal game the year prior. Canada has not had a terrific squad over at the World Championships. Remember the name Michael Carcone, former Toronto Marley? I don't even know if he played a game with the Maple Leafs, but like Michael Carcone was a goal scorer in yesterday's game for Canada, just to kind of prove how how do I say this nicely? Not star-studded that roster is, I guess we could say. But they're a pesky bunch, and they got through Finland, and they're off to the semifinals. But what's even crazier, Dave, is the other couple of teams that came through and are also booking their tickets into a semifinal. Latvia upsetting Timmy Liljegren and Sweden 3-1, and Germany with a victory over Switzerland, which was a big upset as well. It's been upset city at the World Hockey Championships.
Yeah, it's real. When I was seeing the scores, I was just like, like what's going on here? And I mean, the big one is obviously Latvia. Like, who expects Latvia to beat Sweden? Like, I thought, like, with Canada not being so good, with the U.S. kind of, not being as good either, and obviously Russia's not playing in this tournament. I thought this would have been Sweden's tournament, right? They're usually the ones that are like the kings of the World Championships. Them or Finland.
They also usually have William Nylander, who's not here.
I don't know if you heard, but so Nylander initially was going to ask Keefe and Dubas, I guess, or Dubas, about going to the World Championship. But apparently he decided to pull out because he felt it would have been unfair to the players already there if he just kind of dipped in last minute and take a spot from someone. But I guarantee Sweden is probably like, could have used you, bud. We could have used you, because we know That's Nylander's tournament. He's a beast at the World Championships.
Yeah. He legitimately is like Mr. Sweden when he's playing at these World Hockey Championships. But yeah, like there was a Canucks goalie prospect, Artur Silovs, Latvian netminder. Kid was unbelievable in that game against Sweden last night. Liljegren did score though. Liljegren did get the lone goal for Team Sweden, so a little bit of a Leaf flair in that game as well. But it sets up now. It's an easy. Well, I guess nothing is easy, but Canada, instead of having to play Sweden in the semifinal, now have to play Latvia. So Latvia is the only thing that stands between Canada making it to another gold medal game, and then USA and Germany in the other side of the bracket. The Americans currently favored on FanDuel to win the gold medal at plus 115, Canada plus 125. So we'll see what happens there, but hey, Canada, go. It's a pesky bunch. I think I saw there's only two 20-plus goal scorers on that entire roster. So I wouldn't expect, a large margin of victory against Latvia like maybe you would have in the past. They're a bit more of a, let's grind it out and win by a couple.
Just to give you an idea, Canada's leading goal scorer is a defenseman, Mackenzie Weegar, with 10 points in 8 games.
There you go.
3 goals he has.
There you go.
I think their leading goal scorer is Lawson Krause, so 5 goals in 8 games. But yeah, Canada doesn't have they don't have the world beaters like Dominic Kubalik, who leads the tournament with 12. Obviously with Czechia out, he had 12 points in 8 games. So give you an idea of where things are. I was very surprised when I saw Mackenzie Weegar, Canada's leading goal scorer.
Yeah, well, that's where Canada's at right now. Speaking of big world tournaments, there's another one about to kick off up here in Canada. It's going to be out in Kamloops, BC, actually, and it is the Memorial Cup. It could be seen on TSN. They now have the broadcasting rights to the Memorial Cup tournament, and it kicks off with Kamloops taking on the Quebec Ramparts. And why is that of interest to us here on Locked On Leafs? Well, because the one and only Leafs prospect taking part in this tournament is Fraser Minten of the Kamloops Blazers. So Fraser Minten, who was the Leafs second-round pick a year ago, will be taking part in this game. He was over a point-per-game player in the WHL this season, and he'll be hoping to try and help his team win a Memorial Cup, and that kind of all starts tonight. So you can get a glimpse at what Fraser Minten could possibly be for the Toronto Maple Leafs in that game tonight, the first game of the Memorial Cup. You going to be watching?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there isn't much going on sports-wise, so have to find something to keep me interested during the weekend. So yeah, I do like watching the Memorial Cup. I like seeing the storylines there. There's been some, there have been some Leafs that have prospects that performed there. Most recently, I think William Villeneuve was one of the more recent ones that has been there. This Kamloops team too, I don't know if you've seen the roster. It is like Fraser Minten during the season was like one of the guys, and then
pushed down the roster a little bit.
Yeah, because then Kamloops is like when a team is hosting the Memorial Cup, it means so much to make sure that you have the best roster possible. So I think that now they got like Logan Stankoven, Olin Zellweger, they just went roughshod during the WHL playoffs. If you look at their stats, so yeah, he got pushed down a little bit in the lineup there, but I think it's still going to be an incredible tournament. I would like to see Kamloops go far for that reason. The Peterborough Petes, another big story there. They knocked off the London Knights. That's something you don't usually see in the OHL. So there's going to be some interesting storylines to follow there. If you want a good story on Fraser Minten, Kevin McGran from the Toronto Star did a nice little profile of just his season and got a chance to talk to the Kamloops coach to get an idea of what makes this guy tick in a lot of ways. And he said that he expects him to be a quality NHL player, potentially a top 6 forward in the NHL. That's where he believes his ceiling is for sure. So
interesting.
Go and get that article read. It's a nice read to get an idea of what hearing it from someone who works with Minten on an everyday basis.
Yeah, I think I would say like middle six forward, centerman, more of a third line center probably is, I think, what he's being billed as by most scouts and whatnot. So we'll see if he can be a little bit better than that. I mean, I can think of a couple of third line centermen who projected to be that and turned out to be, dominant, elite two-way players. So I think that's what Leaf fans would hope that Fraser Minten turns out to be. You can get a little glimpse of him tonight at the Memorial Cup. I believe that game starts at 6 p.m. And you can watch it on TSN. All right, that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, leave a like on this video. Comment down below. Let us know if you have anything you want to say about what we chatted about today. Think there'll be any amount of what's the word I'm looking for here? Well, Dubas get in trouble. I can't find the word I was looking for. Well, Dubas get in trouble about discipline was the word. No help from Dave on that one, but it's okay. I got there. Any discipline.
I wanted you to get it out yourself. I wanted you to figure that out.
You sat there, baby monkey, and you're like, this guy can just sit here and swim and drown. That's what you did. This is why you're no longer a lifeguard, pal.
Yeah.
No. You let too many people drown. That's what you do. Anyway, well, let's get out of here. It's getting out of hand now. We'll be back with another episode on Monday. Enjoy the weekend. Hopefully we have some more GM candidates to tell you about on Monday as well. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.